So what are we really looking at? And I think it's very important to realize that while we consciously may not be concerned in terms of our brain health until that magic day when we wake up and we're 65 and we get our golden watch and our retirement party, and all of a sudden you're sort of saying, okay, what's the rest of my life going to be? That I think that people become more concerned in terms of their age-associated diseases when they start making that transition into a new stage of their life. But I think it's very important to realize that our brain doesn't care when we retire, that we're really talking about a process of health that goes on throughout the lifespan. So that when we look in terms of brain function, we normally talk about people, I'm just learning how to get this, where am I in here? Anyway, I won't do that. If we look at the green zone, this would be if you came in and I was looking at your cognitive function, I would be saying, yeah, you're performing within a normal range. Some people perform a little higher than others, but that it's well within a normal range. People then kind of slide into that lighter pink, which is an area that we call mild cognitive impairment. And this is kind of a stage where we're saying your cognitive performance is lower than what we would like to see given your age and education, but we don't yet consider you being having dementia, to then actually falling into a stage where you're in full-blown dementia. And I sort of argue this because I do research in terms of diabetes, as saying the green zone is kind of when we're considered having normal glucose tolerance. That pink zone is that pre-diabetic stage where you're saying you're not yet diabetic, but we think that you're at risk for diabetes. And then the darker pink is when you would actually be diagnosed with diabetes. And we actually see the same continuum if we look in terms of indicators of cognitive health. You can see from the bottom two lines that we're saying that if we look at different people, we know that some people transition and decline with age more rapidly than others. Some of that's going to be associated with genetics, but there's going to be a huge piece of it that we're going to say is also associated with the lifestyle of those two individuals. And what that means is that the person that's declining more rapidly is falling into that mild cognitive impairment and dementia range at an earlier age than the person who's declining more slowly. It just makes sense. The longer you preserve your function, the older and older it would be before you would likely to develop dementia. But we have this other piece here that we call cognitive reserve. And cognitive reserve is somewhat of a philosophic term where we say that we often have greater capacity in our brain in order to be able to fulfill performance than we actually draw on. So we may only be using 40 or 50 or 60% of our brain capability when we're young, and we have lots of cognitive reserve. And that what's going to happen is that over our lifespan, that those of us that have managed to build up a lot of cognitive reserve in our youth are going to be very protected in terms of developing dementia, because we're going to get older and older and older until we start falling into those disease categories. And so one of the key things that we really need to talk about is that our goal is to build this cognitive reserve as much as we can, particularly during youth, and then as we get older, to look at how we maintain it. So this story to me becomes very familiar to ones that women have heard over and over again as it relates to osteoporosis. So arguing that we're in our 20s and our 30s, we should be out there, we should be exercising, we should be making sure we have calcium, making sure that we get as dense bones as we possibly can, particularly before menopause, because we start losing bone at menopause. And that once we're into the menopausal years, now absolutely concentrating on the fact that you're maintaining that exercise, you're making sure that your calcium and vitamin D levels are high, so that that loss that naturally occurs postmenopausally is occurring very slowly. We understand that with osteoporosis, we need to apply those same principles to brain health. So there are things that we can be doing in our youth that are going to help us build this cognitive reserve or the plasticity of the brain. Excuse me. And more importantly, there are also things that we can do as we begin to age in order to help us maintain the reserve that we actually have. So we're saying that, and clearly I'm going to come up and saying that what we need to do to maintain this cognitive reserve and to maintain a flexible brain, which in terms of science we call that plasticity. I mean, it's always a funny term because I think of plastic being hard, but we're using it in terms of saying that the brain can be pliable. That it's clear that we're saying that the types of things that are in the Heads Up campaign, exercise, keeping yourself socially engaged, making sure that you're using your brain in terms of cognitive activity, diet, that these are all things that are going to help us build and maintain this cognitive reserve, so that we're all kind of across various different disciplines actually working on the same concepts and the same philosophical base. What's interesting, though, is that we're saying these are very different things. I mean, does it matter whether or not I sit down at dinner with my family or whether I sit down at dinner by myself so I'm not getting social engagement? And we're saying yes, it is. But the really neat part of it is that the brain is responding in the same way to all of these different inputs. So that if we look in terms of how our lifestyle is actually benefiting us, we're saying that biologically that they all associate with indicators of improved brain plasticity, and this just means that our brain cells can continue to make new connections, they can continue to grow, if they get damaged they can repair themselves, all of those things that are keeping our brain biologically active and going. And so that we can conceptualize it some ways that lifestyle is providing that important biologic stimulus that helps with the plasticity. So it's arguing that we want to be doing this throughout our lives, so that we build reserve, we retain reserve. As our reserve is going as we age, we make sure that we're doing everything to continue to grow it and maintain it. So we're not talking about a process that begins at retirement, we're talking about a process that begins when we leave the womb, and that it becomes more important as we age and we're starting to see decrements in terms of brain function, that we continue to try and provide these stimuluses in order to be able to keep the brain plastic, pliable, growing, healthy. And that I think it's also important to realize there that within this we have a number of different ways that we can stimulate our brain. And it's all doing the same thing, they're all beneficial, so that while we tend to talk at a disciplinary level, that it's really the combination of our lifestyle that's more important. So I'm going to talk about diet, but I also realize that as I do that, the diet is only one way I can do this. I can do it through physical activity, I can do it through social engagement, and really what we need to be doing is, as health professionals, is crossing these boundaries and talking more in terms of a global lifestyle than talking in terms of our own specific area of interest and expertise. So that I'm going to argue that correcting more than one lifestyle component is going to be more effective than just correcting one in isolation. So I'm also then going to go further, and I think Joanne was touching on that, and saying that I also fundamentally do not believe that an isolationist approach works within my discipline, within nutrition. So it's very true that, as she was saying, people are often looking for the magic supplement or the magic nutrient or the magic food, and what I'm going to say is we're talking about your whole diet, and at the end of the day you're not going to be going back to your grocery store and picking up a single food, because if you include that every once in a while into your diet, that it's going to have the positive benefits. So the same way I'm saying lifestyle, diet's a piece of it, but we have to think our whole lifestyle. I'm also going to say individual foods are part of our diet, and we really need to think in terms of our whole diet. And so that the bottom line is saying there aren't magic bullets. There's no one single thing that you can do, but there are multiple small things that we can do for ourselves on a daily basis in order to keep stimulating the brain, to keep that plasticity active and going.